Hey everybody, welcome to the week 2 sermon or Bible study of what would be left for student athletes and Christian athletes. This week we have Riley Dooley, the Crimson here at the University of Alabama, leading, and she will be talking about spiritual and physical and mental burnout for athletes. If you missed it last week, we had part 1 over gifted missions. This is part 2 of the 13-week series of what would be left. Excited you could be along for the ride. Hope you enjoy.
So, tonight we're talking about burnout. Basically, we had also sorry for this up here. Basically, we had a chapel on Sunday night, and Joe talked about burnout, and I was like, this is really heavy on the heart for me right now. And I was like, well, how can we shape this into the athletes' small group? And well, the Lord found a way. So, I guess there's really no title tonight besides burnout. I didn't think of a fun creative title, but that's my bad, guys. Okay, so obviously, we kind of all know what burnout is, but here's just a rough summary of a burnout. Basically, it's a response to chronic stress of continued demands in a sport or activity without the opportunity for physical and mental rest. But a lot of times we don't really think about that also including spiritual rest and time with the Lord as well. So the first step is just recognizing this affects us and that it's real. You're not just I don't know. I think sometimes with burnout, we don't think that it actually is happening, and then we're burning to the ground, and it's just really bad. It also comes from an attitude of more is better, which is really prevalent in sports. The more times you win, the more trophies you get, the more records you have, that's great and all, but it's going to run you into the ground if you don't change the mindset of that, which is really hard being an athlete and being in sports, because the goal is to win, to be the best, to get those records, to have the medals and trophies, and and that's just really hard to get away from that mentality. But that does lead you to burning out, which is not good, because also John was talking about last week with your sports, you're not just in football or in track or running or swimming. It's so much more than that. Yes, that's your sport, but also there's a purpose here in that sport. The Lord didn't just create you to just be a football player. The Lord created you to be a football player so you could impact the lives of other people in whatever way that looks like in you. There's a passion and a gift and a purpose attached to your sport. So if you run yourself into the ground, you can't accomplish that mission that the Lord has for you. Which a lot of times we don't really think about that, because it's there's so much pressure to win, and then it's well, what about the purpose aspect of it? So there's 2 different times. Well, there's multiple times this happens in the Bible. There's 2 I'm going to focus on today, which deal with Moses. So this is the first one. We can take turns going through and reading it. I put it on the screen, but also if it's hard to see, let me see. Oh, look at that. Okay. If it's hard to see, we also have rules. So does anyone want to start reading? I know last week you kind of picked, but I'm going to let y'all if you want to read. If you don't want to read, that's fine too.
We can go off the screen?
Yeah, you can if you want. Yeah. You don't have to read the whole thing too. You're I want to read 2 verses, and someone else can pick it up.
Okay. So. Good. When his father-in-law saw all that Moses was doing for the people, he said, "What is this you are doing for the people? Why do you alone sit as judge, while all these people stand around you from morning till evening?" Moses answered him, "Because the people come to me to seek God's will."
Anyone want to pick up at 16?
Mm-hmm. Whenever they have a dispute, it is brought to me. No, you're good.
Okay.
And I decide between the parties and inform them of God's decrees and instructions. Moses' father-in-law replied, "What you're doing is not good."
I can pick up 18. Yeah. You and these people who come to you will only wear yourselves out. The work is too heavy for you, and you cannot handle it.
Yeah. So the reasons why these verses kind of stood out is specifically in verse 14, Jethro, which is Moses' father-in-law, just kind of set the stage, is asking him why are you doing this? You're sitting here alone and you're doing this by yourself. And then in verse 18 it says, you and these people who come to you will only wear yourselves out. This work is too heavy for you and you can't handle it alone. So I think this is a good example of one, burnout, yes, but also without Jethro coming to Moses, he would have burned himself to the ground. It says literally right here, this work is too hard for you to do by yourself. Which I think is important, because a lot of times with with being in sports and just like people in general, like we don't want to ask for help, and that's what causes us to partially run ourselves into the ground and to be so burnt out in our sports. Like especially in like if you're a captain or any sort of like leadership position, you want to do it all by yourself because like that's what society says to do. That's like what the earthly thing is to do. Is like, oh, I'm a leader. Okay, well I have to take this all by myself. No. You can delegate those tasks out, and also you can seek counsel. Like Jethro told Moses, like, hey, like I see this is happening. Like, and Moses didn't see that was happening to him, but like someone else came to him and told him. So it's okay to ask for help, but it's also okay to ask people to evaluate your life and say, am I doing too much? Is this going to run me into the ground? Is this going to burn me out? Which I just think is like really interesting because we don't do that often as people. I think also I wrote down that God charged Moses with leadership, not with performing every duty. So again, like if you're in a leadership role in your sport, or like if your sport's like just you, like with track and stuff, like if it's not a multi-team sport, like it's okay to go to people and ask for help. Like it's not your job to perform every single thing by yourself. Like that's okay to not do that. So that was kind of like the first one. The second one, I think is it shows a little bit more, which is in Numbers. So there's a couple different verses that we'll go through, but this is the first one. It's Numbers 11:14-15. If someone wants to read these, if not, I can. It doesn't really matter.
I can read.
Yeah.
I cannot carry all these people by myself. The burden is too heavy for me. If this is how you are going to treat me, please go ahead and kill me. If I have found favor in your eyes, and do not let me face my own ruin.
Yeah. So to kind of like set the stage, what's happening here is Moses was leading the Israelites through the wilderness. Like they had just escaped slavery, and he was leading them to like the Promised Land, which is like it was an area that like the Lord had promised them. They got to the Promised Land and like they basically like were like, yes, it's what you promised, but like it's too hard. We don't want to like go out and get it. Like there's strong people that live there, so they sat in the wilderness for 40 years and just basically doubted the Lord the time. But instead of focusing on the Israelites, we're gonna focus on Moses. And like in this moment, the Israelites are constantly complaining. They're talking about all the burdens, the hardships, and it's becoming so overwhelming that Moses literally asks God to kill him. That he's so desperate in this moment that he's like, Lord, just like kill me. Like take this away from me. He was just so frustrated in that moment that like he doesn't even want to go on. And like not saying that like we get to this point necessarily, but like when we burn out, we get to the point where we're like, Lord, I can't do it anymore. Like take it from me. And like again with your sport, like that's also like you're taking that purpose away. You know, like the Lord again didn't just create you to be an athlete. Like He created a purpose through that like athleticism. And if we're getting to this point where we're like, Lord, let's just end it for us, like that's doing no benefit to people around us. So there's a couple verses that talk about how the Lord like responded to the situation. So we have Numbers 11:16-17. Oh, that's way too soon. There we go. Anyone wants to read these ones?
I got you.
Beautiful.
The Lord said to Moses, bring me 70 of Israel's elders, who are known to you as leaders and officials among the people. Have them come to the tent of meeting, that they may stand there with you. I will come down and speak with you there, and I will take some of the power of the Spirit that is on you and put it into them. They will share the burden of the people with you, so that you will not have to carry it alone.
Yeah, so again, going back to like the other verses that we had read with Jethro, like the Lord is not gonna like let you go through situations alone if like you can't handle it by yourself, and that's totally okay. It's okay to ask for help. Like it's okay to be like, Lord, I can't do it. Like help me out. The Lord literally in these verses is taking the spirit off of Moses and putting it on other people so that they can help him, which is so cool because like a lot of times again in the world like we get so caught up in this like I have to do it by myself mentality. Like I get that way. Like and it will bring you out. Like for example, last semester I led a small group by myself, and like it was so hard to maintain that every single week because I was pouring into other people, but like I wasn't able to ask ideas off of other people. I wasn't able to get help, and now I'd be texting John every day. And I'm like, John, what do you think about this? Like, can you read this? Can you look over this? And like now I co-lead 3 small groups, which is so much easier than just doing the 1 small group by myself because there's people and community around me that like to bounce ideas off of. So with Burnout, ask people around you for help. And also ask the Lord for help because He's going to provide. Like, if you're like, Lord, I need other people to help me, like, He's going to give you those people to help you, which is like, ask for help. Anyway. Then the next, God shared the burden. he didn't let Moses go through on them. He brought people to him to help. The next verses are Numbers 11, 18 through 20. If someone wants to read these ones, if not, we can.
I'll tell you.
Cool. Take it away.
Tell the people, consecrate yourselves in preparation for tomorrow. When you will eat meat, the Lord heard you when you wailed. If only we had meat to eat. We were better off in Egypt. Now the Lord will give you meat, and you will eat it. You will not eat it for just 1 day, or 2 days, or 5, 10, or 20 days, but for a whole month, until it comes out of your nostrils, and you love it, because you have rejected the Lord, who is among you, and have wailed before him, saying, why did we ever leave Egypt?
So what's interesting about this is that they said we're better off in Egypt. They were slaves in Egypt. So they are basically telling the Lord, like, hey, we knew that you gave us this promised land and you brought us out of slavery, but, like, we were better enslaved, which is absolutely crazy to think of. Like, that's just, like, what are you doing? But this just goes to show that, like, the Lord's going to provide for the people. He listened to Moses, the leader, and also the people who were complaining, and he said, I will give you so much meat to eat. Like, you're going to have food, like, if you just trust in me. So if you feel yourself getting burnt out, go to the Lord and ask, like, Lord, like, give me what I need. And he's going to.
When it says,
Yeah.
If only we had meat, we were better off in Egypt.
Yeah.
Were these the Israelites that Moses was leading?
Yes.
Oh,
Yeah.
And they
Yeah.
were,
Yeah, so he was leading them through the desert, and they were basically like, not like we were better off in Egypt. Like, this is too hard.
it was too hard.
Which, like, that's a whole other study in itself. Like, you can take this and break it up into 2 chunks. Like, last night for Comes to That Diva, we actually focused on, like, the Israelites' perspective and, like, how God is faithful through the wilderness. And then there's also, like, the part, like, Moses' like side of things, where it's, like, the Lord's providing through him, like, as a leader. But yeah, it's very interesting.
It's a crazy thing to think about from their perspective and what
Right.
they're doing too, because like
Right.
they are actively being led through a desert
Yeah.
in the day by a cloud,
Yes.
and then
Yeah.
in the night
By
by
fire.
a literal pillar of fire.
Yeah.
And then they're like, oh, but you know, and they're
Yeah.
and they don't have and they don't have food. Like they have
Yeah.
herds of sheep with them,
Yeah.
but the Lord is providing all of them with manna, which is a type of like
Yeah.
heavenly bread
Yes.
and water daily.
Yes.
And they're like, you know, yeah, you're God, you're cool and all, but it was so much easier in Egypt. We didn't have to do anything, which is
Yeah.
crazy to think about. Because the reason that they left Egypt was because the Pharaoh that had come to replace the Pharaoh beforehand,
Yeah.
that was great and all, was like, I'm going to take away everything that you've ever had and all the work that you've been doing, and I'm going to make life way worse for you.
Yeah.
And they were like, even though we were oppressed, you know,
Yeah.
that would have been easier than walking.
Yeah. It's like crazy because it's like that's like the whole like Red Sea parting, and like he gave them clothes that like never like tore. Like they walked through like the desert for literally like such a long time, and it's just crazy to think about. But that might be something we actually that might be next like 2 weeks from now. But the Lord's gonna provide basically. And then this is like kind of like the rounding out of like these verses. It's Numbers 11, 21 to 23. Someone wants to read these ones. Take it away.
I got it.
Cool.
Yeah. But Moses said, here I am among 600,000 men on foot, and you say, I will give them meat to eat for a whole month. Would they have enough if flocks and herds were slaughtered for them? Would they have enough if all the fish in the sea were caught for them? The Lord answered Moses, is the Lord's arm too short? Now you will see whether or not what I will say will come true for you.
Yeah. The verse that like really to hone in on here is this last one. Now you will see whether or not what I say will come true for you. It's kind of like a dare, like
It is.
it's so funny. Like I feel like the Bible sometimes like has that like little like comedy in it where it's like I don't know, like you'll just have to wait and see. Like you know, like I dare you to not trust in me. And this verse just like shows like it's a reminder of God's power. Like there are Hello.
Good.
There's 600,000 men on foot, and the Lord's like, no, I'm gonna give you enough food to eat for a month. Sorry, I'll pause. How's class?
Good to see you, man.
How's your class?
Good. It was
Good. What was it?
coaching baseball.
Oh wait, kinesiology? Like yeah.
So I registered late, so my counselor just put in like
Oh.
whatever classes was left.
Yeah,
So
that's so real.
coaching baseball and basketball was like one of them.
That's sick. That's like upper level kinesiology, right? Like that's like
300 something.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah.
I love those classes.
Glad you made it.
Appreciate it.
Yeah. So we're talking about athletic burnout tonight. So yeah, this is a reminder of God's power. So like if you feel yourself getting burnt out, like go back to these verses and remind yourself that like doesn't matter what you're going through, like the Lord's gonna provide, and He will dare you to not trust in Him because it's gonna be fine. So how do we recover from burnout? It sometimes seems like super complicated when you're in the burnout because it's like you're so overwhelmed by your emotions and there's nothing left in you, but literally you just turn to the Lord in prayer and worship, and then you ask Him for help. And it feels so hard in the moment because you're like, no, like I don't have time for that. I'm doing X, Y, and Z. No, like just turn on a worship song, go in a closet like John does.
Can I add one thing, like one
Yes,
thought to
yes,
it?
yes.
It's when we're in situations like that, it's so easy to tell God how big our storm is, but I think
Yeah.
a good mindset to have is to tell the storm how big our God is.
Yes. Yeah.
When Jesus was in the boat during the storm, when He calmed it and said, "Peace, be still," He was asleep.
Mhm.
He knew He was going to be fine.
Yeah.
And and that was our God sleeping through
Yeah.
a storm because He was bigger than the storm.
100%. 100%. And just like real quickly bouncing off of that, and like Moses' story, just like highlights that like trying to carry too much alone like will lead you to that burnout. Like give it to the Lord. Like.
Hey everybody, so if you've gotten this far, the camera just died, but we are very, very close to being done, if you want to just take it really quick. So we just finished up. I have the notes put up on a separate screen, so if you see me looking at the side, that's what that is I'm reading, don't worry. Lesson on burnout. Moses' story highlights that trying to carry too much alone leads to burnout. We see that in Exodus, what Riley had highlighted. So the next step is how do we recover from burnout? So we recover from burnout by entering God's rest. So turning to Him in prayer and worship, asking for help. That's where it talks about entering into a time with the Lord in the secret place, spending time with Him. We talked about this in chapel in Riley and I's own small group that we're both a part of, where it's you pour out into the world, but you need to make sure you're being poured into. And Jesus talks about it with the woman at the well, the Samaritan, in Samaria, about how those who drink of the water of the well will thirst again, but those who drink of the living water will never thirst. And the living water is God. That is who is Jesus, is God. And so to spend time with the Lord is to spend time with Him and to be filled by Him. And that is one way to really protect ourselves from this spiritual, emotional, mental, physical burnout, is by spending time with the one who keeps us sustained. How do we avoid burnout is the next. Riley had this great quote, "A good thing becomes a bad thing when it becomes the ultimate thing." We need to make sure we're being careful of what we're putting on our pedestal, because if we put something that we're pouring ourselves out into above the thing that is pouring into us, there's this discrepancy, and we're not going to have an overflow, we're actually going to have a deficit. She has James 1:17 says, "Every good gift and perfect gift is from above, coming down from the Father of lights, who does not change like shifting shadows." The opportunity to compete is a gift. Sports are a good thing. But if you idolize that gift that you're pouring into, and it's above the one who's trying to pour into you, at some point, this gap is just going to grow. You need to fight for that overflow of the living water that Jesus provides. And that will help keep you sustained, because it's through that overflow that you're able to pour out. She also said, it is critical to acknowledge the potential for sports to become the ultimate thing in our lives, especially when we give so much of our time to our sports. I mean, for myself personally, when I was a student athlete here at the University of Alabama, I was training 20 hours a week on schedule. But then I would stay in the weight room longer. I would, after I was done with the swim practice, I would do extra hypoxic work for my lungs, or I would do extra core work, and then I would go home and I had to focus on recovery. I would stay at the pool for another hour or so in the training room getting recovery done. Like, it goes from 20 hours of the week on the books to 30, a full-time job while also being an athlete. And it's so easy to fall into the trap that this is the ultimate thing because this is taking up the ultimate amount of my time. So you have to be careful with that. You have to be careful with how you're interacting and living in that day-to-day life when everything you do is sports, but you also have to remember that every sport you do is from God. When this happens, when sport becomes the ultimate thing, the good gift from God becomes a bad thing and will lead to emotional, physical, spiritual exhaustion. You will burn out because the sports are not meant to be the ultimate things in our life. Jesus is the only one deserving of holding that place in our life. There's this great quote from a good mentor of mine, and he said, "You can never be let down by something that was never holding you up in the first place." By idolizing our sports, we're allowing it to hold us up emotionally, when that wasn't the purpose of the sport at all. Jesus is meant to be our support. Jesus is meant to be the one holding us up, because he will never falter. However, when we start trying to fill God-sized holes with worldly-based things, that's whenever worldly support starts to crumble and we fall. We see this in the parable where Jesus talks about the two houses, building your house on the firm foundation, which is symbolic for who he is in the church, and building yourself upon that, so whenever the storm comes and the wind blows, the house doesn't fall and it's firm. Great song, Firm Foundation, by the way, highly recommend. But then you have the other house that built its house on the sand, and the storm came and the wind blew and it fell, and scripture specifically states that the fall was great. It didn't just kind of trip over, but it collapsed. Okay? That's a major detail to realize, that the author of that parable, Jesus, and the writer of that gospel decided to specifically put that in there and not hide that detail. So, how do we prevent from making unultimate things ultimate things, and we keep our priorities level? We need to get away with God. We need to prioritize our time with him. The reality is that we all have time on our schedules, whether we realize it or not. Do you have eyes to see the breaks, and do you intentionally schedule them into your calendar? You can live one of two ways with a relationship with God. You can either live a gap life or a God life. A gap life is you have your schedule, you've got practice in the morning, you've got like an hour break, then you have school, then you have lunch, then you have another few classes, and it's in those gaps where you put God. Or you can live a God life, where it's like, today's a day where I was on God's wake-up list. I'm going to spend time with him, but I have these things to do. But today my day is for God. And then you do that every day. And every single day, every time you walk to class, you're walking with God. You're not walking to God because you're already there with him. You wake up in the morning. Something that I do personally is I wake up 10 minutes before I need to get up, and I just put on a worship song, and I just sit in bed. Partially because I don't want to get out of bed, but also because listening to worship music before I get up helps set my mind for the day. It's given me, as I've been practicing that, an almost ultimate peace, one of the fantastic gifts of the Spirit, peace. We avoid burnout the next time by staying in tune with God's specific direction for our lives. This means we consult him about our schedules. We take time to care for ourselves. We learn to depend on his strength and carry our duties. Proverbs specifically says to not lean on your own understanding, because we were never meant to know or eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. That was not for us. But we did. But even then we can't distinguish. We know, but we can't distinguish. We live in a broken and a fallen and a sinful world. And it is that trips us up, that hurts us, that leads to these spiritual moments where we feel burnt out. When people tell us to fan the flame, but it doesn't even feel like there's a spark in the campfire of our hearts. So we say all of this to encourage you. Be intentional about your day. In the same way you're intentional about your time with your sport and your training, how much more intentional could you be with God, and how do you think that would change your life? For me, especially since I stopped swimming and I really realized that God wanted my all, and he didn't just want my morning or my 5 minutes before I went to bed, and every single day was for him. I can tell you that the overwhelming peace that I've had, even in some of the most stressful situations of my life, is incomprehensible in a way where it is, the proof of it is only through God. So I challenge you, next time you feel like you're burnt out, don't go to music, don't go to distractions, face it and walk with God and see what he has to say. God bless everybody.